weekly publication of independent political and economic news analysis by the economist Jargal. Our gazette is published in Mongolian, English, Japanese, and Russian. Please order your subscription online at www.jargaldefacto.com or from the post office called Mongol Shudan near you. Also, you can order by phone at 7007 8916.
Good evening. Welcome to Defacto Review, our weekly in-depth analysis on the current news and affairs. Today we are here with Mr. Mukhtul Patral, market analyst and CEO of Cover Mongolia.
Good evening.
Good evening. And you can join in on our conversation on MNB World Facebook page or on Twitter with hashtag Jargal_Defacto. Let's take a look at our today's topics. Changes to the criminal code of Mongolia. Social and economic situation of Mongolia 2019 and 2020. Will Shariin gold mine go bankrupt? Let's get into our first topic. Changes were made to the criminal code of Mongolia during the last week's parliament session due to a number of cases of corruption and abuse of power being dismissed because of the statute of limitation. With this new change, previously dismissed cases can be re-investigated. Some lawyers oppose this decision, claiming that this undermines the legal situation of the defendants. Also, offense of defamation has been moved from law on infringement to the criminal code, and lawyers say that this is an attack on the right to express one's opinion. They claim that this change is especially harmful to media and journalism sector. So our first question about this one is, what is your opinion on the recent change to the criminal code of Mongolia? And could you tell us what was changed?
So this is a classic example of how the legal system is stolen to benefit a few group of people at the expense of the general population. The original, the criminal code was amended in 2017. And nobody knew exactly how the laws changed to benefit this statute of limitation. There was no media or public discussion about that change. We only found out about it only about last year when a few major corruption cases were dismissed because of the reason that their statute of limitation was passed. A few major corruption cases that involved millions of dollars. For example, a private company taking a multi-$100 loan from a foreign bank and putting state-owned companies like the Erdene Mining Corporation and the Ulaanbaatar Railways as collateral. This is a major case that has been going on for years now, but we found out that this case was dismissed because the statute of limitation has run out.
Right.
And because of the media public outcry, they attempted to change the criminal code again. But what the legal scholars are saying is that there's a thing about the nature of laws is that they cannot be used retroactively. If laws are used to jail or sentence anyone retroactively, this could undermine the whole legal system of any country. So
Right.
that's why there's an understanding in the world that you should never pass a law that applies retroactively. Because, for example, what if someone was sentenced, let's say for maybe 2 years for some crime and is serving that sentence or has finished serving that sentence? What if the public says, okay, he shouldn't have gotten 2 years. 2 years was too small.
Right.
He should have been jailed for 10 years. And what if there's a public outcry like that? And what the parliamentarians shouldn't do is that use that public outcry to change any kind of laws to apply retroactively. So, for example, if someone had already served a sentence, potentially the parliament could pass a law again, change the criminal code again, to retroactively retry that person again to serve a higher sentence. So that's why laws should never apply retroactively.
Right. So what exactly changed from the criminal code of Mongolia?
So
is there any more problems with the statute of limitation?
So what the parliamentarian is saying during the parliamentary deliberation was saying that, okay, yes, the criminal code changed in 2017 and that was a mistake. We shouldn't have lowered the statute of limitations to that point where a lot of corruption cases get dismissed during the investigation stage. So now they're saying that, okay, we changed the criminal code again to expand the statute of limitations, which will allow us to retry those or reinvestigate those cases that had been dismissed. But what the legal scholars are saying is that, okay, this is against our constitution, and anyone who applies or gives this new criminal code to the constitutional court will get dismissed. So what the legal scholars are saying is that, yeah, they changed the statute of limitation, but it's not going to apply because someone will eventually give this new code to the Constitutional Court and say that applying it retroactively is actually unconstitutional. So this could be just a way for the parliament to save their face. There is a public outcry. We have an election pending, so perhaps they are changing the criminal code to just save face, but it's actually not going to get applied, not going to get used to retry these cases, to meet these major corruption cases that have been dismissed.
So about the one about offensive defamation, so is this really harmful to journalism sector, as some lawyers are saying?
I believe so. I believe Mongolia has taken a massive step back in our democratic institutions. Freedom of speech, freedom to publish, freedom to write, to investigate, and the need to protect journalism is fundamental to any kind of democracy. In 2017, the previous criminal code, what they did was they took out the defamation article from the criminal code and put it into the law on infringement. Basically saying that, okay, we don't need to spend massive amount of time investigating it and prosecuting it and trying it in a court. What they did was took out that defamation, put it into law on infringement, meaning that it will take a much shorter amount of time to figure out whether one person has actually been defamed. And the maximum sentence was a monetary fine, right? Up to, I think, 2 million tugriks. But that was perhaps looked as if it was a step in the right direction. But again, it did not protect journalists. What in reality happened, from my observation, was that journalists started increasingly censoring themselves, called self-censorship, right? Which is not freedom of speech and freedom to write. Protecting journalism is a fundamental pillar of any kind of democracy. So every international organization has kept advising us that defamation cases should never be tried in the criminal court. It should only be tried in the civil court, meaning that if someone says my name was defamed, you can sue that person who possibly defamed you. It could be in an article, it could be in a social media tweet or post. But taking that one step forward, two steps back, they took the defamation part of the law infringement, putting it back into the criminal code, I think is a really big step backwards in freedom of speech in Mongolia. And this will further undermine democracy in Mongolia, where journalists will have to be extra careful not to start
involved in any defamation
kind of cases where, yes. And even if the article was correct, even if a journalist spent their time investigating a certain case and wrote an expose and investigative piece, that person could still be sued, could be prosecuted, could be tried, and that will take months and months, and a lot of legal expenses just to prove yourself that you actually what you wrote, what you investigated was truth. So
Right.
this will further, I think, scare journalists into hiding in their own corners
So-
and not to be able to say anything controversial.
Is it possible to file a complaint to the Constitution of Mongolia about these, possible wrong articles?
Well, I'm not a legal scholar, but I think there should be definitely a case where it should be at least tried, because in our constitution we do have a clause saying that our freedom of speech and is protected by the constitution, and there could be a case to be tried in the constitutional court, but I'm not sure if anyone would be willing to do that.
Right.
But the criminal code, the statute of limitation part of the new criminal code, I think definitely someone will give it to the constitutional court, and I think that clause will be eliminated. That's at least according to what the legal scholars are saying.
Right. So let's get into our second topic. The National Statistics Office presented social and economic situation of Mongolia as of the preliminary result of the 2019 on 16th of January. On this topic, we are highlighting the comparison of the current social and economic situation with last year. Political parties are keen on making promises to improve the economic and social situation because of the upcoming parliamentary election. So our first question about this one is, what should we focus on from the statistics presented by the economic and social situation?
Well, we don't know, officially we don't know what the GDP growth was last year, but which is I think scheduled to come out in the February NSO statistics, where GDP growth was last year. But our Prime Minister came out ahead of time saying that we grew 7.3%, which I think is very irresponsible thing to do, because statistics, especially when it comes to economic statistics, is something that is used by businesses to make major strategic decisions. Foreign investors look at Mongolia saying, okay, is Mongolia is going to continue to grow? And I think it was irresponsible of the Prime Minister to announce a GDP growth before the actual official statistics came out. One thing that we should also be wary is that GDP growth in Mongolia is slowing. Everyone from ADB to World Bank has lowered the forecast for 2019. For example, the Asian Development Bank previously estimated that we would grow around, I think, 6.9%, but they lowered it to 6.7%. And for 2020, ADB forecast, they lowered their forecast from, I believe, 6.5 to 6.1%. Well, they did say that Mongolian economic growth is still resilient, but told us that it's stabilizing to certain level. Last year, exports grew. Our trade balance is never been this high. Our trade surplus has never been this high. Our foreign currency reserves has never been this high before. But the last few months of 2019, we saw the coal export starting to decrease slightly. Overall, annually, coal exports grew, but what worried me was the last few numbers, where even Australia couldn't export their coal to China anymore. So this is telling that perhaps we shouldn't be overly optimistic about 2020 as well.
Right.
And okay, macroeconomically, Mongolia is growing, but in reality, to small and medium businesses, who are the largest employers in Mongolia, the non-performing loans is still high, meaning that all this GDP growth is not going to everybody in Mongolia. Perhaps it's only benefiting a few companies who are exporting, but all this growth is not translating into actual benefits to small and medium businesses, who are, of course, the largest employers. And as you know, in dollar terms, our economy did not actually grow at all.
Right.
Only very slightly. It's been around $12 billion for the past 3-4 years. So in Tugruk terms, we might be growing, but in actual dollar terms, I think the Mongolian economy is still sort of stagnant.
So are the changes to the situation of 2020 is related to the parliamentary election? And do you think it will, positively grow as the parliamentary members are promising us?
Well, historically, our parliament and government has been prone to exaggerating economic numbers. So I think we haven't moved away from that practice yet. The budget deficit is expanding in 2020, but because the economy is growing, percentage to GDP has been shrinking according to our IMF agreements, but it's still a very massively expansive budget, meaning that a lot of projects have been budgeted, but we may not have all the money to actually finance them, which means that Mongolian government will have to borrow again more.
Right.
And I said the 2 trillion tugrik deficit in 2020, the government means that we will have to borrow again. But we won't know the full results of all these budgets until the end of 2020, but unfortunately we have an election in the middle of 2020, so we won't know exact effects of this expansive budget until maybe towards the end of the year, or maybe even early next year.
Right. So, were there any improvements in the human development part exactly?
Well, human development, it's a United Nations statistic, Human Development Index, right? So it not only counts a person's income, it also counts the quality of education, the quality of health, the quality of government services, many factors. And we've been actually losing ground, going down the rankings in Human Development Index for the past, if I remember correctly, for the past 5 years.
Right.
So, okay, we may have fixed our macroeconomic situation with the help of the IMF. But I think what international analysts and all the economists are telling, that all this growth is not translating into human development, meaning that our quality of education is not improving, our quality of health is not improving. Even an average person's income is not growing. If you take away the effect of inflation, what's called real income has been stagnant, hasn't been growing at all in Mongolia. Average salary is around 1 million tugriks, but if you take away all the mining jobs out of that equation, people's salaries, income has not actually been growing in real terms. And actually, public servants, especially teachers and doctors and nurses, their real income has been falling consistently for the past 3 years. They're earning less than they did 4 years ago in 2016. So this is why I think overall the feeling on the streets is that the economy is not growing. If you ask any average person on the street, they'll tell you that their income is not growing, their life is not improving. But if you look at the macro GDP numbers, we seem to be growing, but that money is not being translated into real income for ordinary people.
So, what kind of works is the government doing to actually improve this important part?
Well, what our government needs to start doing is start to invest real money into our education, because every economist will tell you that one investment in the education sector becomes $20 overall, to $20 contribution to the economy. But it takes a long time for these effects to happen. So my feeling, and I think what every economist will tell you, is that Mongolia needs to start putting actual money into the education sector, not building new schools and kindergartens. That's only we need to build schools, but we're building them now because we didn't build them in the last 30 years. So we are trying to make up for all the lost time. We didn't actually build those hospitals and schools. But now, and if you look at the budget, our government likes to tell us that we spend more than 20% of our budget on education.
Right.
But a lot of it, most of it, if I can say, goes into constructing new schools, new kindergartens. But we haven't actually spent any amount of money on trying to increase teachers' salaries. Like I told you, teachers are actually earning less. They're even struggling more to survive than they did only a few years ago. So all these 20% of the budget is not actually being use to improve quality of education, which is...
It's just expanding the capacity.
Yeah, we are building, yes, we need to build new schools, but we're not spending any money to increase teacher salaries. If you increase teacher salaries, that will translate into quality of education. And the whole society is angry about the quality of education that our children are getting. These college entrance exam results have been announced publicly, and we've been only out of 100 points, our kids are getting only 20% in math, 20%
right.
in Mongolian language. So this is telling you that we're not going in the wrong direction in terms of our policy on education.
Right. So let's get into our third topic. On 14th of January, staff of Shariin mine filed a complaint to the Energy Regulatory Commission of Mongolia, claiming that the mine can no longer operate because of the faulty policy by the government. Prices of fuel, energy, and other such products are controlled by the government in Mongolia. And because of this, deficit is a common problem in energy sector. So our first question about this one is, will the Shariin gold mine go bankrupt, as some economists are saying?
Basically, it's already at a stage of bankruptcy. They haven't filed officially for bankruptcy, but this is telling you that de facto Shariin gold coal mine is bankrupt. You cannot pay its worker salaries.
Right.
And as our viewers will know, Shariin gold coal mine supplies most of the coal to Darhan and Erdenet power stations, right? So if this situation continues, what will happen to our citizens in Darhan and Erdenet? Will they have to freeze to death in the middle of the winter? And this is telling you that for the past 30 years, our government's policy on the energy sector has never changed. This is a legacy kind of a policy by the government to keep electricity prices low,
right,
to please citizens, right? But what modern economics would tell you is that subsidizing the production part of electricity or even production part of water is an inefficient way of using budget money. For example, in Singapore, what they do is that Singapore might be one of the richest countries in the world, but they still have poor people. And what the government does is that they don't subsidize the production part. They don't give money to any of the power stations or any of the distribution part. What they do is like they give subsidies to the final consumers
right,
of these products. And of course, electricity and water, they're not just business products or services. These are an essential part of any kind of government where the government has to step in and be an active player. But what Mongolia needs to stop doing is subsidizing each part of the node in the supply chain. The government gives subsidies to the coal mines. The government gives subsidies to the railways that transport the coal. The government gives subsidies to the power stations. And the government gives subsidies to the distribution part of it. But what that ends up doing is that a rich person pays the same amount of electricity than that the poor person does.
Right.
Who are we trying to subsidize? I mean, subsidies and social welfare are designed to take care of the people who are in need of those services, not the richest. So this policy has been totally broken from the very beginning, and the government does realize this. And in 2012, they passed a parliament resolution saying that in a couple of years, we will liberalize the energy sector completely. But what the government ends up doing is that extending the date of this application. This has been extended for, I think, ever since 2012.
Right.
Because they're fearful of what the people, of the backlash that they will bring. Yes, of course, some portion of the population will have to pay higher electricity price. And this is not just electricity, this is also water. We are paying the cheapest, we have in Mongolia, compared to the similar countries, we pay the cheapest electricity and the cheapest water. And most of that benefit only goes to the rich people who are, they don't even, for them, it's pocket change,
right,
with the amount of electricity bill that they pay. But for ordinary citizens, it is still a significant portion. So what the government should do is liberalize the entire sector, and start giving maybe electricity vouchers and water vouchers to those group of people who are actually in need of those in need of that welfare. And we know all who actually needs this help. Our government has a good statistics on every household in Mongolia.
Right.
They know household level income. They know that. Previously, we did a study to give children subsidies, right? The child allowance money, in order to implement that, the government has an extensive research of who those households are, and we already give them some kind of subsidies. For example, some households get food vouchers, right? Food coupons. Some children get child allowance and children's allowance, mother's allowance. All these kinds of subsidies are done using that government statistics. So we know who those needy people are, and we can do that. We already have I think, the infrastructure to do that. But it just needs the government to be willing to actually implement that parliament resolution that has been passed 8 years ago.
So this practice is, as you said, it's impossible to keep up, and this is a need an immediate change.
Yes.
But what about saving energy? For example, saving heat, because some of the apartments are really hot, and even though you close the heat, the thermal power plant keeps on pumping that heat.
Right.
You pay the same. So.
Right. And this is government, of course, needs to do a lot of work to refurbish all these old apartment buildings, to insulate them better, to be able to conserve energy more, and that needs to be done. But the government cannot go to every apartment and start forcing people to insulate their houses better. But the other part of the equation needs to happen is every household needs to start being responsible when it comes to their energy, right? For example, if they start paying higher heating prices, if they start paying higher electricity, water prices, that responsibility, every household will have the incentive now to check how much energy they're losing through their windows, through their windows and walls, through the ceilings, through their floors. So part of that responsibility needs to be on the household side as well, not just the government. Yes, the government needs to step in and
actually educate people about this one,
and renovate all these old apartment complexes to be able to insulate better. And there are a bunch of other international organizations who are helping the government to actually do that.
Right. So is there any policy changes about energy sector of Mongolia in the future?
Well, because this is an election year, I don't expect anything to change. But what the government will no doubt will have no choice to do is to step in, at least in the Shariin coal mine case, where they have to step in and do something because people will freeze to death if nothing happens, if Shariin continues to halt their coal operations, and it will affect ordinary people. So I think government will do something, but I don't think in terms of the broader energy policy, I think more needs to be done to convince the government to do the right thing.
So is the government really right to be afraid of the higher prices and people's outlash because of that?
Yeah, I mean, you have a good point. Maybe they're overly scared of how the people will react. Right. I think every person knows that in Mongolia, I mean, a person living in Zaisen shouldn't be paying the same subsidized cheap electricity prices as someone in the Gare district. Right. This is not just right at all. So I think if the proper amount of public discussion and education is done, I think the people will be willing to pay higher prices for electricity, for water especially, and water in water's case is especially difficult because in 5 or 10 years' time, Ulaanbaatar will run out of fresh water. So this is a clear danger that Ulaanbaatar city residents are facing. So something needs to be done, and the Millennium Challenge Corporation is actually doing the $230 million second compact is specifically designed to address this water issue in the UB city. Right.
So hopefully, with the help of international organizations and NGOs, we will actually have a eco energy city in the future. Okay. So that is all the time we had for today. Thank you for staying with us. We will see you next week with more news and updates. Have a nice evening. Goodbye.
Good evening.